Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to Maddox Scale and Customer Success Summit. You are currently watching the role of data in scale and how to scale it session. I'm excited to introduce our speakers, and as I introduce them, I'm going to have them answer our icebreaker question, which is, what would you like to scale in your personal life? So first up, we have Connor Kelly, who is a Scaled Insight Manager at Asana.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Connor. I manage our Scaled Insights programs at Asana. Asana, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a collaborative work management platform. And our Scaled Insights team aims to equip our revenue organization with all of the data tools they need to execute their jobs, whether that's building account strategy or building value narratives to share with our customers the value they're getting from the platform and point towards additional opportunities to really optimize their deployment. And as for the icebreaker, if I could scale anything in my personal life, I'm somebody who loves having plans. However, I don't really like making them. Like I hate the act of like figuring out what's happening on any given city, any given night, and then like contacting friends and family to see who's interested. So if I could just scale that whole process and like have a personal assistant tell me what I'm doing when, sign me up.
Oh, I totally get that one. That's a good answer. Uh, well, next up we have Nick Jatian. He is a data engineer and at CS Ops at Samsara. Nick, what would you like to scale in your personal life?
Yeah. So I will probably go with laundry for me. If I can get out of that one, that'd be great. Very time consuming. But Samsara, I'm the data engineer for the CS Ops team at Samsara. Samsara being a connected operations company. So we are trying to help our customers, which are like transportations, logistics companies, kind of better improve on whatever is most important to them. That could be driver safety, that could be compliance, fuel, etc.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. And last but definitely not least, our moderator, Nick Meach, CEO and co-founder of Matic.
Yeah, I think I'm plus one on laundry. That is the bane of my existence. So I would love for laundry to be automated away in scale. So that's probably the one that I would take.
Great. Well, before we start the session, I just please want to remind our attendees that you can ask any questions you have in the chat. We'll have time at the end to have a Q&A, and if we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure to share them with our speakers after the session and post the answers alongside the session recording when the Resource Hub goes live. With that, I'll let our panel get started.
Awesome. All right. First of all, thank you again, everybody, for attending. I'm really, really excited about this session. Data is near and dear to my heart. And as most of you probably already know, this isn't anything groundbreaking, but data is probably the linchpin in how we operate in today's world, and not only how we make decisions, but right, it really is the new currency when it comes to business. And so, my background has always been in analytics and data, and I've always supported customer success and sales. So being able to provide the data that they need to do their jobs effectively, as well as tell those concrete ROI stories and value stories with their customers. So really excited to talk about data and how to scale it when it comes to customer success, and figure maybe start the conversation with I'd love to ask the panel here. You all support customer success and are on the ops and data side, and so what do you feel like are the biggest challenges when it comes to data, specifically within this field, right? So would love to maybe have one of you kick us off on that question.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So at Samsara, we one of our big parts of our product is that we have this very nice dashboard our customers can use to kind of view trends within their organization, and that dashboard's real time. And so when we're delivering data to our CSMs, it's really hard to kind of like do real time data in that use case. And so what we end up having to do is work off replicated tables, which is pretty standard for any kind of analytics function. But it does add some challenges, right? So the customer's data can change on a daily basis. So we just have to be very careful that we're very careful about our testing, and we go through multiple steps of UAT to make sure that data is at the highest quality, and then also to make sure that our CSMs understand the context that we won't be utilizing real-time data for most of the analytics functions.
Yeah, plus one to what Nick said. I mean, that's for us as well. We have in product the ability for admins to see various insights around their deployment of Asana. And that is constantly a challenge, right? Like some of the data that we deliver to our sales teams, typically there's some degree of lag there, whether it's a day or some hours, but making sure that, we can at least explain what that gap is caused from is really important. Another thing that we constantly are thinking about is, our CS organization has multiple tools that they use to execute their work. And all of these tools may have data infused within them. And so making sure that where there are data points across these tools that are either similar or the same data point, that there's parity across the tools. So that's really huge for us, making sure that if they're not coming from the same data source, they're at least using the same logic and really making sure that we're not introducing inconsistencies across the tools that our CS teams use.
Yeah, I'd love to double click on that, because I feel like data accuracy, when you say that word, is I think a lot of people cringe a little bit. And everyone thinks the grass is always greener on the other side, but it's not. I feel like every company that I've worked for and every company that we work with, right, data accuracy is always a tough one, especially when your customers have something with inside of your product that they can reference. So Nick, you alluded to this, right, where, hey, it's real time. I go to the dashboard, and let's say a CSM does a business review or does, share some data, it's going to be a copy of what is in production. And so at the end of the day, there could be a discrepancy there where it's like, well, when I log into the dashboard, it says, X, but you're telling me it's Y, like what's going on there? And so I guess maybe a follow-on question to both, like, what have you guys implemented I know you talked about testing along the way, right? But what are some maybe tactical things that you guys have done to help ensure that you guys are clearly communicating to the customer and enabling the team to speak to the data, as well as, maybe ensuring that there is accurate data that you are sharing with your customers?
Yeah, I think there's a few things you can do. One is if you are utilizing a tool such as Matic, right, where you're doing some kind of automation with your presentations, you could kind of get that in writing that, this is the window we're looking at specifically, events can change. Also is making sure that the CSM understands that, these things can change pretty rapidly in the dashboard, right? So if the customer goes in and makes 40 modifications the day before, those might not be available yet in the presentation they built, that morning, or something along the lines of that.
Yeah, and I think in addition to what Nick said, one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of like make sure that where our data is pulling from, we have one single source of truth table that kind of populates additional downstream tables so that we're all using the same underlying logic. I think kind of where we run into troubles in the past is where the different platforms, the different tools that we have that have data are picking from different data sources that were built by different teams for different needs. So making sure that we have that single source of truth for data that we can use to make sure that all of our systems are kind of run under the same logic.
Totally. Yeah, I think an interesting learning that I've had in my work experience is that typically we're not the creators of that data, right? We are consumers of that data. And so having those cross-functional relationships with engineering and product, who are, creating the copy of production for us to go and consume, and, making sure that they're aware, okay, hey, we are using this data in a customer-facing way. So FYI, if you change the tracking or if you do anything that messes with these base tables, we need to be notified so that we can make the necessary changes on our side, right? Like a great example, I will never forget this. A prior company that I worked for when I first came out to the Bay Area, a challenge was always product would always do backfills. Like something would happen and they would backfill a table because there was an error or something along those lines, but it would never trickle all the way, and it would not cascade all the way down to the tables that we had made copies of. And so as a result, product would say one thing, and then we'd look at our data and it'd be like, whoa, this is way different. This is not this is a material difference. And then when we'd go and ask, I'm like, oh yeah, we had to do a backfill. Like, why didn't you let us know so that we can then do a backfill on our side? So I think learning there for us was always like, how do you build those relationships and how do you put in the processes to say, hey, if something does change, let us know so that we can also make sure that we're updating our tables. That's a great learning there. I guess what is the biggest challenge that you guys have experienced, maybe not just in your current roles, but in prior organizations when it comes to data and working with customer success?
Connor, do you want that one or do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take this one on. So I think, at Asana, I've been here for almost 3 years now, and we've really been trying to build out our catalog of data assets, data tools for our revenue organization to use. And I think as we've really proliferated the insights that we have available to the team, one of the challenges, and maybe you could see it as an opportunity that we had to really make sure that we're surfacing the most important insights, is this need for like prescription in our tooling. So really making sure that where there are tools, dashboards, or Matic templates with a ton of data in them, that we're building some mechanism to surface the most important insights to the top. So for example, if we're looking at a Tableau dashboard with a bunch of data points regarding a specific customer, creating some sort of scoring or some sort of model that can take all of these data points and maybe aggregate them and surface the most important trends, so that we can use that to really like allow and enable our sales and CS teams to really just like lock into one specific metric. When it comes to Matic templates, for example, another place where we have a ton of data is in our Matic templates that we share with customers. And so one of the ways that we really try to surface the most important aspects of a customer's usage is through benchmarking. So is there a way that we can contextualize all of the data that's going on within our customer's deployment and really help provide that prescriptive North Star of here's what good looks like? So really, I think just as you have data in so many different places, making sure that there's some way to surface what's most important.
So I guess a follow-up question to that, and I think this is something that a lot of people ask, right, is like how do you know what data to prioritize and what data to scale, right? So you talked about these insights, you talked about the benchmarking, right? What have you done, and Nick, maybe this is also for you as well. So sorry, like, what have you done to really determine what should be scaled, right? What should be automated there?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one as a follow-up and then pass it off to you, Nick.
Sounds good.
So in terms of how we think about what types of data to scale, I'd say at Asana, there's a couple ways that we do this. I think the first is just reactively understanding what sort of questions, what sort of needs are coming from our customers or our account teams. So we have a really great dedicated custom analytics team that works through those requests, whether it be a customer who is asking for a particular set of data about their Asana instance, or whether it's an account team who really just wants to put together a story of how their customer is using our product. So as our team receives those requests, whether it be a repeat request or maybe just one request that landed very well, we'll look to scale those so that we can make that self-serve available to our entire revenue organization. So that would be more of like the reactive approach to determining what to scale. I'd say then there's more of that proactive, how can we get ahead of things that we know will make an impact for our sales teams and our customers. So at Asana, we're constantly releasing new features, new ways to use our product. And so particularly when there's releases that we're very enthusiastic about and we know that our customers are excited about, they've seen it on the roadmap, and our marketing team is really thoughtful about the approach. We'll really try to get ahead of that by building out reporting either to meet that release or as a fast follow. And to do that, we're constantly in touch with our product marketing teams, our product development teams, and our data science teams who are familiar with how that new feature, how all of the data will be really like crafted for that feature. Because oftentimes it's like new product logging. So we really need to understand like how that's going to be logged. But yeah, really building on that excitement from feature releases and proactively providing those insights so that our sales teams can really celebrate these features as our customers start to use them.
Okay. So just to recap then, before I pass it off to Nick to get your thoughts, it seems like, Connor, you're mentioning like one, there's like a reactive way to kind of figure out, which is, hey, what are the people that are on the front lines, the customer success managers, what are they doing repeatedly, or what are they asked from customers to do repeatedly with data? Let's start there. Let's automate that. And those are the metrics and those are the data points that we should scale out. But then on the proactive side, it's, hey, what's around the corner when it comes to product releases and product enhancements that we want our customers to adopt, and how do we leverage data to go and do that?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I think that Connor really took that one and ran with it. So I would agree with what Connor said. So the biggest things for me would be like understanding pain points, right? If you're seeing a pain point for a CSM, like can we automate that out of it, out of their workflow so that they have more time to do what they do best, which is working with the customers. That's one way to go about it. And then additionally, if there's anything that like an ops associate or an analyst or a scientist that's going to be kind of like looking at this data notices, that could be a good like adoption trend or something along the lines of that. That could be another thing that would be considered for scale or for scaling.
Yeah, I think challenge that I've always had, and I think this is something that I learned really early on in my career, was I've never been on the CS side. I haven't been a CS manager myself, right? And so as someone who loves data, I would always do analyses or things that I thought was really cool. But at the end of the day, I'm not the one that's going and delivering it. And so I always felt the best mechanism to be able to figure out what to scale from a data standpoint was going directly to those folks, the CSMs, the AMs, the sales team, and like really hearing firsthand, like, okay, well, what are you hearing? And I think one thing that's really underrated that not a lot of people leverage today, I think they do leverage it on the CS and sales side, but for folks that are in data or are on the ops side, is just listening to calls from reps, right? Like we have all this technology today, whether it's Gong or Chorus or SalesLoft or any of these tools, and where you don't necessarily need to partake in the meeting, but on your own time, you can go and see, hey, how are people talking about ROI of our product, right? What are the CSMs using? How are they talking about this particular data point? What is the reception to it? And I think that's an underutilized tool that a lot of folks on the data side don't necessarily leverage and is in their back pocket. So
Yeah, it's
I
a
guess
great call out as well.
next question that I'd love to kind of really dig into is around alignment, right? Because I think when it comes to data, right, again, we have access to the data. We're the ones that are playing around with it, analyzing it, and doing all that. But how, at the end of the day, again, we don't control the data. We're not the ones that are actually creating the particular, the tracking within our product and all that stuff. So how do you go, what have you guys found that's worked really well in getting alignment, cross-functionally when it comes to figuring out like the data points that really do matter that you want to go and scale to the front lines?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one. I can start with that, but you kind of have two approaches. You have a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, right? And so from the top down, if the C-suite comes in and they say, hey, we know we want to target this specific thing. Can we have like a team? Like we have one team that needs a specific set of data. It's very important for the organization. Can we all like get behind that collaboratively? And then they can have those interactions with the other business units that are going to be required for getting that data, assuming it's a series of hard data points to collect.
Yep.
The other way would be, bottom up, which is where an IC is going to start investigating and be like, I think we need something. So we need X, Y, and Z. How do we go about it? And then you kind of have to do that, like managing up, I guess, to understand or help the senior leadership understand the importance of that. And then again, once there's kind of that collaboration at the leadership level, that's when you can kind of start to move forward with the data that you're hoping to get and get that cross-team collaboration.
Yeah, and I guess Nick kind of made the top down and bottoms up kind of analogy there. I'll take it a different direction and say a lot of it is kind of like working horizontally and being that conduit between the field and understanding what types of conversations they're having with our customers. And then at a high level, understanding like what value themes we're looking to communicate, but then working super closely with the teams who know the data the most. So whether that's data engineering, data science, or even the engineers who are producing the parts of our product that create logging, is really being like, I feel like it's very important to have that person who can really like transcribe the needs of the field and what is providing value to our customers, and then ultimately understand in the data how exactly we can make that come to life.
So I guess a follow-on question to that, Connor, is, is there a framework in which you guys use to determine which data should be scaled? So we just talked about like getting cross-functional alignment, right, and the different strategies there. But is there a framework that you have found really successful, especially at Asana or maybe your previous company that you worked at, that kind of helps you figure out what to scale?
Yeah, I think so much of it is just testing, concepts in the field. And so typically when we think about the development of a new narrative, what we really like to do is create a working group of folks who have customer interactions that are good opportunities to debut new ideas, or maybe they even have the type of relationship where they're super collaborative in building stories together. Because oftentimes what our customers want and what our customer success teams want, they're the same thing. They want to build out a healthy deployment. So I think it's, for us at least, making sure that we have a really solid working group and good customer relationships that we can use to really test new ideas, test new content, to have that confidence to actually scale this to the majority or to our whole revenue team.
And I guess, maybe kind of taking the conversation in a little bit of a different direction now. We talked a little bit about the frameworks and all of that. I think a big part of any data, right? You can deploy the data, you can do all of that, is feedback loops, right? Like, how do you, just because you deploy something and you potentially automate it, or you figure out, like, hey, here are the North Star metrics that we really care about, and this is how we're going to go and scale it, data accuracy, all of that. But how do you ensure that the impact of that data is there? And so, like, I'd love to maybe get both of your take on, how do you guys implement feedback loops specifically on the CS side, right? Once you have scaled something.
Sure. And I can start with this one as well. I think this is something that our team does actually fairly well. And what we do is we have an ops associate or two that help kind of build out a survey quarterly. And so the survey goes out to our CSMs so that we can understand, like, where are we meeting the bar and where we're not meeting the bar in terms of like their expectations of the data or the tooling that's available to them. And so that can help us guide our priorities as well. Additionally, we have Slack channels and things of that nature. So our CSMs can reach out to our ops associates, all of which are super proactive in having those conversations, or, they can also reach out directly to me via those Slack channels as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Connor, anything on your side that you guys have found fruitful on just the feedback loops between what you guys have scaled and what the CSMs are doing on the front lines?
I'd say +1 to what Nick said. A few of the other things that come to mind are building really strong relationships with frontline management within the CS organization, making sure that any feedback that might come from the front lines is surfaced up through management, and then ultimately we take that in. Other things we have include a pretty active Slack channel that is fully dedicated to all of the content that we produce. That is pretty active here. We also have, we're a collaborative work management platform. We have an Asana project, of course, with an intake form that we receive feedback from. So I think those are the main things that come to mind. Another thing we do as well, which is a little bit more of a data-driven approach, we are an insights team, is that we actively have a dashboard where we kind of oversee all of the usage of our platforms, whether it's Matic or it's our dashboards. And there we're really able to get a sense of which teams are using our platforms the most, what types of content they're viewing. And that's one way that we're able to just, in a scaled way, kind of do like some meta-analysis on what's being used and what's not.
Yeah, love that. That's fantastic. Yeah, I think one thing that I've come across is, specifically being in a data role, I feel like we tend to kind of say yes to everything, right? And especially when it comes to feedback loops, and being able to push back eloquently and in a nice way, in a compassionate way, I feel like is a underutilized skill that I feel like folks on the data side, we need to learn, right? Because you can't scale everything. And just because someone does raise their hand and say, hey, Nick, I would love to be able to go see this over time. Here's, really asking those questions. Okay, like, what's the so what? Why do we need to go and show that? I think that is something that's a skill set that I've tried to master, but it's something that I feel like is also very important in validating those feedback loops, so that we don't just do everything that the CS teams want, but we really try to figure out what's going to get the biggest bang for our buck.
Absolutely.
Love to maybe kind of ask around, adoption specifically. Like, how do you ensure that the teams that you work with, so the CS folks that you guys support, right? You guys are automating and showcasing a lot of this data that they're requesting. How do you ensure that they're adopting this effectively in their day-to-day, right? Like, so Connor, it seems like you guys have taken a data-driven approach where you guys are looking at the usage data of how often they're pulling the data, how they're using it, right? But we'd love to kind of get understanding. Is there anything else that you guys have done to see? Maybe Nick, maybe I'll have you start on this one. Anything else that you've seen that has worked really well to see how they're adopting?
Yeah, so I would say just kind of in the beginning, like ideally we're tackling projects that are pain points, right? So they're things that are like heavily requested by the teams, whether that's an automation tool or a piece of data. So hopefully whatever we're working will get picked up natively or without much intervention. Now that doesn't always happen. So it's important for us to have, like the Slack channels where we can mention deployments and mention what is being currently active or is moving to deprecation or all that kind of information that the CSMs would need. Additionally, we do have CS Ops associates that work with all of our various CS teams. And so that's kind of that direct connection to be able to kind of guide them in the right direction of any kind of data or processes that we have developed that will support their team. And that could be something built specifically for their team, or that could be something that's built kind of for CS as a whole and that they are going to utilize. But I'd say that's mostly what we do.
Sorry, no. So do they do like enablement of like, hey, here's how you talk about the data, here's how you present the data and all that stuff that you guys scale?
Yeah, so we usually, if we have like a data point we think needs definitions, we might have a message or a Slack message or a not Gmail, but email that kind of has that additional context, or we have the CS Ops associates to kind of help with that, bridge that gap in any questions. And like we mentioned earlier, we had that feedback loop of that Slack channel where somebody has like questions about what the data means, they can reach out to us and then we will hopefully be able to give them that answer, in a pretty quick time frame.
Cool. Connor, anything else on your end that you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I think in your original question, Nick, is interesting. You mentioned like, how do we make sure that people are not only adopting, but like the keyword there is effectively adopting. Yep. And so, we can analyze the data and adoption all we want, but we want to make sure that people are effectively using our tools. So I think there's a couple ways that I think about broadly enablement. I think from an onboarding perspective, one of the things that we've been trying to do more and more is make sure that as we have new revenue customer-facing team members joining, that we're really making them build that data-driven muscle, understanding all of the data that's available to them at Asana, but then also how to apply that to their roles. So we have that kind of sprinkled in throughout the onboarding process. So that's kind of like our first thing that we do, but then enablements, it's an ongoing effort because, content is constantly being updated, it's constantly being released. So I think a few things, and some of it is similar to what Nick had mentioned. We try to produce, self-serve resources for people to understand, like not just what are these data points, how are they defined, and then what are some underlying assumptions involved in how they're aggregated, because they're not always, extremely straightforward or intuitive. And then ultimately, how is this used? So putting together resources and housing them in whatever resource management system you might use. For us, it's HighSpot. But yeah, just really building out the resources that can ultimately be used to not just understand what the data is, but how it can actually be applied.
That's amazing that you guys, for new hire onboarding, they go through the data. I think that's an awesome thing to do. And I think one other thing that I'll kind of add as you were talking about that, it is like one of those things where you can't do it once, it has to be repeated. You have to have multiple angles in which you are enabling and teaching folks on how to communicate on the data. And not just from folks that are on the data side, but I've also found that people really comprehend things if it's communicated by a peer. So like, we could go and do a training that says, hey, here's how you talk about this chart, or here's how you talk about this data point. But it actually lands even better when it's somebody that's a CSM, that's a peer of theirs, that's used it in real life. And like, hey, here's how I did use this data last week in front of a client, and this was the response. Here's the objection that I got, or here's the question that I got. So I think also leveraging maybe more analytical folks that are on the team, on the CS side, has also been something that's been really, really fruitful. So, and then we got about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we open it up to questions. The last question that I've got for both of you is, what advice would you guys give to an organization that's just kind of starting out on this journey of leveraging data, right? Especially in customer success. So, obviously Asana and Samsara, bigger companies, right? You guys have a lot of data to play with, but maybe for some of those companies that are just starting out, what are some of the things that you would advise them to do when it comes to, flexing that muscle when it comes to data?
So I guess I can start on this. I'd say the first thing is understanding kind of what kind of, instead of thinking necessarily about like what is like a quick data point, maybe thinking about what is the impact of the data point and what can we do with it. So if you know that your CSMs are still doing a lot of manual work, maybe the first stepping stone is, all right, what automation can we do to allow them to do the things that they want to do, which is supporting customers and doing less like going and grabbing CSVs and kind of gluing together all the data. So, and that can be done in a tool like Matic, right, or something similar. So instead of like looking for a specific data point, you're looking for the problem and solving that problem through automation. It could be one way to go about it. Additionally, if you know like there's metrics that show like that your customer is getting value from your product, that could be another way to kind of start, especially if those are fairly easy to access.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I would say when starting out, just talking to your customers, talking to your customer-facing reps, I think is so important. Oftentimes there may be certain like ad hoc things that have done with customers, and if those have been done in the past in a manual basis, that kind of produces that organic playbook on what to scale. But even if they haven't been, I think just understanding, maybe trying out a couple of things before scaling, because one thing that I've seen is that some of the foundational things that we created when we first really started building out those scaled tools have really stuck around, and they're really, really impactful to this day. So I think really just like understanding what those like P0 or highest priority metrics are to scale, so that really those the kind of like 20% of metrics will really go like the 80% of the way as to what gets used for a long time.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a really, really good call out. And I don't know, I often find that hardest part is just getting started. I think there's a little bit of a scariness to start, and I think people tend to optimize for perfection, and data is never perfect. And so it's better just to start, and might not be perfect, but start somewhere and iterate over time. And I think that's usually the best way to kind of go about it. Well, thank you both. Really great conversation. Obviously, as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about data. It is near and dear to my heart, and really appreciate the insight that you both have shared with the broader group. So, Matt, I'll pass it over back to you if there's any questions from the attendees on what we can help answer.
Yeah, we got a couple in the chat, and then we also have a couple backups too to kind of help us fill the time here. For the first one we have, is there consideration looking at the process itself? Perhaps the process needs to be redesigned, or human behavior needs to change rather than automating it. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
I guess the question is like, should we be looking at the process? Like,
I'd say the short answer is yeah, absolutely. Like if you're getting a series of questions, it's often very important to kind of think about what is the question we're trying to answer here, or what is the main point that we're really looking at. Are we thinking about solving it the right way, or is there either a way that's faster or better depending on kind of the metric that you're evaluating for that specific question?
Yeah, and to add on to what Nick said, I mean, 100% process is a huge piece of things. And I think oftentimes in processes, you can't really fully automate every single process, right? But some automation may help get that process from 0 to 50, and then 50 to 100 is accomplished manually. So I think thinking through which steps in a process really makes sense to automate. If the whole thing maybe it can't be automated, or maybe it would just be too big of a lift to be automated, can still provide some benefit.
great. We got another question here from the chat. I like this one actually a lot. So how do you get stakeholders to better articulate what they need help with?
That is a good question. I can start with that one. I think it just kind of goes back to really understanding, one, you having a really good understanding as like what the business cares overall, right? Because at the end of the day, There are probably certain things that are top of funnel that coming top down that are really, really important, whether it's retention, whether it's like, hey, this year we're really focused on adoption or really focused on churn. So having a really good understanding there and what your stakeholder really cares about. And then I think that will inform the questions that you do ask them around like what they really care about, right? Like it all starts with what are on their OKRs that are most important. And us as folks that are in data, in ops, we should be tying ourselves to those OKRs that our stakeholders really care about at the end of the day, right? Nick, Connor, I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there. I'd say that one thing that's helpful for me is um, when you're talking to people, sometimes just pulling up the product and kind of going like, all right, let's find this specific area that like you want this data point from the product, maybe let's talk about where it's coming from and then understand like why are we looking at this page specifically, like why are we looking at this specific metric, and then kind of having those conversations to understand again. This actually kind of goes back to the process question: is are we asking the right questions? If we are, how do we move forward from there? And like, how do we explain the business impact as we go and approach other teams about that development?
Thank you. So we've got some other questions here as well. Um, how do you deal with resistance from the data team or competing priorities?
Yeah, I can take this one on. I think we're constantly making requests to our data science team, and oftentimes it's not within their scope of work necessarily, and kind of like what they're building for our insights team isn't. They don't necessarily understand the full impact. So I think what we're constantly trying to do is just help articulate how exactly what we're asking for is going to be used by our stakeholders, and ultimately how it will benefit not just our stakeholders, but benefit our broader organization. So I think we're constantly trying to like educate, inform our data teams on how what they're doing actually impacts the business as a whole, and ultimately trying to paint that picture of the value that they're providing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question. I've definitely leveraged, giving the broader benefit for why we need data from the team before. Another question we've got here: what are some of the best ways to stress test the data or identify holes or gaps?
Yeah, I can kind of kick this one off, and I'm sure Connor will have more to add to it as well. There's always ways to find edge cases, right? What we like to do is, like I said, we typically do multiple stages of UAT, and the first one can be like a quick sanity check on the upstream data, and then after that, once we're getting ready to put into a business application, that can be a more thorough UAT with particular sometimes with a fairly large sample size, depending on the importance of the data and how often it will be used. But the biggest thing is to grab like a very large variety of groups, right? So when we're doing our investigation, we want to make sure that we're going to find the edge cases that have happened in a customer with a smaller kind of instance or smaller use case, and then also look at like some of these really large and hard customers, right? So the customers that have really large products and like in our case like lots of vehicles and all that kind of stuff, because that complexity is going to be a little more likely to show kind of some of these odd edge cases where we'd run into, and then also making sure that we're looking at where they are geographically and all that kind of context as well.
Yeah, big +1 to what Nick said with regards to really making sure you have a diverse sample when testing, when you're doing user access testing. I think I can't tell you how many Matic templates I've generated just with different customers, making sure that everything looks okay. I think another thing that I'd add to that is, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Nick, oftentimes the data that we use, being the consumers of that data, we may not have the full context for why a data set was built or really how it was built. So I think one thing that we always try to do, especially when we're kind of dabbling into new data that we don't have a ton of context for, of course, we'll try to review our data catalog and try to read through those resources. But it's oftentimes just reaching out directly to those teams, whether it be the data science teams or the data eng teams, to make sure that we're interpreting the data correctly, and ultimately the assumptions that we're baking into the reports that we do build are accurate.
Yeah. I think
Absolutely.
one other thing that I would add to that too is I think again, I said this earlier, I feel like we tend to have perfection be the enemy of progress and a lot of times, right? So if there are these edge cases, right, if the edge case is 1% of the time, or if the data discrepancy is really only happening 1% of the time and it's really trivial, it's not material, then probably not worth dedicating the investigation resources to go and figure out, okay, how do we go and accommodate this particular edge case? And so I think that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as you are going through this journey is optimize for the 80%. Don't optimize for the latter, right? The 20%.
Great. We've got another question in the chat here. How do you stay on top of data requests from the inside data team versus the requester's end? If the requester stops engaging with the ticket or has multiple open going stale, any tips there?
Okay.
And it's in the chat if you need to reread it.
I guess one clarification when you say inside, so okay, the data team versus requests. Okay.
Yeah, I think they're specifically asking about like a request coming from like a CSM versus from a customer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do we talk about frameworks, right? So you do have to have some sort of a framework in terms of how you triage tickets or requests that do come in, and then you need to assign some sort of level of priority, right? Like if this data that people are requesting, if it's going to go back and help us with our true, North metrics that we really care about as an organization, it's going to move the needle, then that's going to be a P0. You got to prioritize that. But if it is something that comes in that is ad hoc, that is not necessarily, consistent with what we're trying to accomplish as a group, then I would deprioritize it. And I think the other thing is just being very, very transparent. I think data is the least amount of, I feel like data and ops probably get the least amount of resources, right? And so at the end of the day, just being very transparent. It's like, hey, here's our workload. This is our team. This is what we're working on, just so that everybody has visibility, and here's why. Then I think people are going to be less inclined to be like, well, if you want me to go and do this, then I got to take this off of my plate in order to accommodate it. So I think just being very transparent as to like what you have on your plate, what are all the tickets that you're currently working on and why, goes a long way in helping that person who submitted the request either, flag it up the chain to be like, hey, no, we need Connor to go and prioritize this. They can then go and do that for you rather than you having to make that call.
Yeah, plus one to that, and I can share a little bit from the Asana experience. So I work on our scaled insights programs, but we do have like a custom analytics team. And, one thing that they impose are SLAs. So basically saying like when we do receive requests, it's going to be at a minimum of this amount of time. And basically requests are prioritized based on urgency levels and kind of like customer size. So I think there is a bit of a framework for determining, how long things will take. That being said, it's definitely situational. And, if a customer maybe like isn't engaging so closely with a certain request, or maybe it doesn't seem like such of a high priority for them, typically that's how those sort of judgment calls will be made to actually like deprioritize certain requests versus others.
Great. Well, I think that brings us right to the end of the session here. Any questions we weren't able to get to, which I think we were able to get to all of them, we'll pass along to the speakers and they'll share their answers along with this recording in our resource hub. All Summit attendees will be notified when the recordings are live. So I just want to say again, thank you to our wonderful speakers. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for everyone else for attending. This is a really great session. So thank you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.